Each testimony builds a stronger case. Every sharp focus reveals clarity. Learning your legal rights, upholding unyielding justice.
I don't care what that says. Anybody can order one of those online.
Sir, that is a federal prosecutor's badge. My name and the DOJ seal are engraved on it. I am parked in an
You
official
people always got a
court space.
credential, always got an
I need you to hear
explanation.
me clearly. I am a federal prosecutor. Do
You
not
get
touch
on the
me.
ground now. I won't have.
I told him I was an assistant attorney. I told him calmly, clearly, both hands visible on the steering wheel. I told him the spot was marked for official court business. I told him my badge was in my pocket if he would give me a moment to retrieve it. He told me, you people always got a story. He told me I'd been driving recklessly 2 blocks back. He told me the badge could be fake. Then he told me to get out of the car. Deputy Bright Zachary had been with the Dallas County Sheriff's Office for 9 years. Every one of those years had been spent patrolling downtown Dallas, the glass and steel corridor where federal courts, county offices, and law firms stood shoulder to shoulder, and billions of dollars moved through quiet handshakes and sealed indictments. I would learn later that he had accumulated 10 separate complaints during those 9 years. 10 incidents. Civilians, almost all of them Black or Latino, who filed reports alleging racial profiling, aggressive language, and conduct that crossed every professional line the badge is supposed to represent. Every single complaint had been marked unfounded or resolved with nothing more than mandatory retraining and a notation buried in a file. The union protected him. His supervisors called him proactive. The department looked the other way. But on a crisp Thursday morning in downtown Dallas, everything about Deputy Zachary's protected career was about to come apart at the seams. My name is Alice Bright, and I am an assistant United States attorney with the Northern District of Texas. I had parked my black Audi A6 in a designated federal court space directly in front of the Earl Cabell Federal Building on Commerce Street. I was 11 minutes early for a grand jury presentation on a $42 million wire fraud case, 18 months of investigation, 47 boxes of hard evidence, and 3 cooperating witnesses. It was the kind of case that required absolute composure going in. Deputy Zachary did not know that. He looked at a black woman in a luxury sedan, and his bias gave him only one answer. That false assumption triggered an escalation that would end in his termination, a national reckoning, and a $13 million settlement captured in full on 2 cameras he did not realize were recording every single word. Before I continue, I want to know, where are you watching from? If this is your first time on this channel, please hit that subscribe button right now. Stories like this one need to be told, and your support is what makes that possible. Drop your city in the comments and let me know if you've ever experienced something like this, because I already know I'm not alone. Downtown Dallas does not ease you in. It arrives all at once. Glass towers cutting into a pale winter sky, the low hum of federal machinery running just behind the polished facades, men and women in tailored suits moving between buildings that house the machinery of justice itself. The Earl Cabell Federal Building stands at the center of it, solid and deliberate, the kind of structure that reminds you what authority is supposed to look like. It was 8:47 on a Thursday morning, and I was sitting in my legally parked black Audi A6 directly in front of that building, reviewing the final notes on my grand jury presentation. The parking space was clearly marked official court business only, 10 feet from the entrance I had walked through hundreds of times. The air was crisp, the kind of morning that felt like order, like everything held in its right place. The knock shattered that. It was not the polite tap of someone wanting attention. It was the sharp, angry knock of someone who had already decided something, knuckles against glass with the full weight of assumed authority behind them. I felt it in my spine before I processed it with my eyes. I looked up from my phone, and through the driver's window I saw a Dallas County Sheriff's deputy in full uniform staring down at me with open contempt. Not curiosity, not routine suspicion. Contempt. His face was already arranged into something hard before I had moved a single muscle. I know what that look cost to receive. I have received versions of it my entire life, in courtrooms and parking garages and conference rooms where my presence required an explanation I was never asked to provide. I know the calculation that happens behind it, the rapid, automatic sorting of a black woman into a category that has nothing to do with who she actually is. I lowered the window smoothly. Both hands stayed on the steering wheel, visible, exactly where my training and 11 years of being a black woman in federal law enforcement had taught me to keep them. He demanded ID and warned me not to reach for anything. His voice had the particular edge of someone who expected to be obeyed before he finished his sentence. And then he said, "You people." He said I had been driving recklessly 2 blocks back. The words landed like something cold pressing against my sternum, not because they were unexpected exactly, but because they confirmed everything. That tone, that phrase, the casual, dismissive certainty of it. The same tone that reduces 11 years of federal service and a 97 conviction rate to a color and a car and a story he had already decided was a lie. I have heard it in different registers my entire career. It never stops landing the way it lands. I kept my voice measured. I told him I was an assistant U.S. attorney with the Northern District of Texas. I told him I was parked in an official court business space, that the sign was right there, and that my federal prosecutor's badge was in my jacket pocket, and I asked his permission to retrieve it slowly. While my hands stayed on that wheel, my mind did what it always does when my body is in danger and my credentials are being questioned. It ran the inventory. Spelman College, summa cum laude. University of Texas School of Law, top of my class, 87% trial conviction rate. A personal commendation from the Attorney General of the United States for dismantling a $50 million public corruption ring involving county officials. 11 years of walking into that building behind me and doing the work that holds systems accountable. None of it was visible to him. None of it mattered to the story he had already written about me before his knuckles hit my window. I produced the badge. Gold, my photograph, the seal of the Department of Justice, my name engraved in full. He barely glanced at it before the sneer crossed his face. Anyone could get one of those online, he said. No one was above the law. The irony of that sentence, spoken to me in that moment with the evidence I was carrying, I would sit with that for a long time afterward. He doubled down on the reckless driving claim. He ignored the sign 10 feet away. His voice climbed. His posture shifted forward, the particular kind of escalation that has only one direction. He ordered me out of the vehicle. I know the statistics. I know them the way black women in this country know them, not as abstractions, but as weights we carry into every encounter with law enforcement. I know what happens when compliance fails. I know what the data says about who survives these moments and who doesn't. So I kept my hands locked on that wheel. I kept my voice steady. I repeated clearly, and for the cameras I knew were running, that I was asserting my Fourth Amendment rights, that I was a federal prosecutor, that this detention was unlawful, that everything was being recorded. He yanked the door open. The grip on my left arm came fast and hard, harder than I expected, and he began pulling me toward the pavement. I am not a small woman. I did not come easily. And the physical reality of what was happening, being dragged from my car in front of the federal building where I have prosecuted cases for over a decade, by an officer whose name I already had in a sealed file upstairs, that humiliation burned hotter than the pain in my arm. I kept repeating it. Calmly, for the record, for the dash cam, for the body cam he was wearing and apparently had forgotten about. I am a federal prosecutor with the United States Attorney's Office. You are assaulting a federal officer. Everything is on camera. The crowd had begun to form. Suited professionals pausing on their way into the building, FBI agents, federal marshals, a defense attorney I had cross-examined 6 months earlier. Several of them called my name out loud. That's Alice Bright. The AUSA who took down the county commissioners, and the recognition in their voices only deepened the absurdity of what was unfolding. And then a voice cut through everything. Captain Harlan Brooks had been with the Dallas County Sheriff's Office for 23 years. I had seen him in the corridors of the Cabell Building many times, a steady presence, career law enforcement, the kind of officer whose face you remember without knowing why. He was walking past on his way to a meeting inside when he registered what was happening on his own department's body cam in front of a growing crowd of federal officers and courthouse professionals. He ordered the deputy to release me immediately. Bright Zachary froze. The grip on my arm went slack. I watched Captain Brooks' face drain as the full weight of the situation assembled itself in front of him, who I was, what was recorded, who was watching. I straightened my suit jacket with hands that were shaking in a way I refused to let my face confirm. I picked up my briefcase from where it had nearly hit the pavement. And Captain Brooks walked me personally toward the courthouse entrance, his voice low and careful, telling me that internal affairs would have everything within the hour. I nodded. I thanked him. And I walked through those doors carrying 18 months of federal investigation, a grand jury waiting on the 14th floor, and the quiet, settled knowledge that Deputy Bright Zachary had just made the worst mistake of his career. He just didn't know it yet. There is a particular kind of discipline required to walk into a grand jury room 30 minutes after someone has grabbed your arm in a parking lot and told you that you do not belong. I know this because I did it. Inside the secure corridor of the Earl Cable Federal Building, I stopped for 30 seconds. Not because I needed to collect myself. I have always had a reserve of stillness for moments when everything external is pulling at me. I stopped because I needed to be precise about what I was walking into. The $42 million wire fraud case that waited upstairs did not care about what had happened outside. 47 boxes of evidence did not care. 3 cooperating witnesses who had put their lives on pause to testify in front of that grand jury did not care. The case demanded everything I had, and I was going to give it everything. I smoothed my hair in the reflection of the corridor window. I adjusted my jacket. I rolled my left shoulder once the arm that was already beginning to ache where his grip had been, and I walked to the elevator. Inside the grand jury room, I presented with the same controlled authority that has defined my career. The wire fraud case was complex, a web of shell companies, offshore transfers, and forged investor agreements that had taken a team of agents and analysts 18 months to unravel into something a jury of ordinary citizens could follow and believe. I had rehearsed my presentation 3 times the night before. I knew every exhibit. I knew every turn in the evidence. And when it was over, all 7 defendants were indicted. I sat in the witness waiting room afterward and let the adrenaline, which had been holding me upright since 8:47 that morning, finally begin to move through me like a tide going out. The arm grab, the phrase, "you people," the sneer at a badge that represented 11 years of federal service, the crowd watching, the shaking hands I would not let my face betray. I thought about every black woman who has stood in a version of that moment without a dash cam, without a federal building full of witnesses, without a badge that anyone had to eventually take seriously. I thought about what happens to those women, what gets marked unfounded, what gets quietly filed, what never makes the news because there is no footage and no title behind the name. And I am going to ask you something directly because I need you to sit with this. Do you think any law enforcement officer who uses the phrase "you people" during an official stop, any officer should face immediate termination? Not retraining? Not a notation in a file? Termination. If that lands for you, type "fire them" in the comments right now and share this story, because what happens when the cameras are rolling needs to be heard by people who have never had a camera of their own. I left the building that afternoon carrying the same briefcase I had walked in with. My phone had begun buzzing before I reached the lobby. By the time I got back to my office in South Dallas, it had not stopped. Courthouse security confirmed that multiple bystanders had captured the incident on personal devices. The dual footage, my dash cam and Deputy Zachary's own body cam, had already reached local reporters. By early evening, the clip was approaching 1 million views. By the next morning, every major Texas outlet had picked it up, and then the national networks followed. Federal prosecutor racially profiled and assaulted outside Dallas courthouse dual cameras capture everything. I learned his full name from the news coverage, which felt like a strange inversion. The man who had treated me like a suspect, identified by the cameras he forgot were running, Deputy Bright Zachary. 9 years on the force. 10 prior complaints, all from Black or Latino civilians, all previously marked unfounded, all resolved with nothing more serious than a checkbox and a memo. Captain Brooks had already placed him on administrative leave by the time the second round of news cycles began. The response was immediate and cascading. The Black Bar Association issued a statement. The National District Attorneys Association followed. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division announced it was opening a review. My inbox filled with messages from federal prosecutors across the country, from civil rights attorneys, from Black women I had never met, who wrote to say they had been pulled from cars and had no cameras and no titles and no one who believed them. I spent the rest of that day giving measured interviews between calls on my active caseload. There was a quiet strangeness to moving between those two registers, answering questions about the assault on camera, then pulling up a case file and making decisions that would affect someone's next 10 years. But that is the nature of this work. The system does not pause because you have been humiliated inside it. Late that evening, I stood at my office window and looked out at the Dallas skyline. The lights of the city spread below me, ordered and indifferent. The same system that had protected Bright Zachary through 9 years and 10 complaints was cracking now, not because the system had changed, but because the wrong Black woman had been targeted. One with 2 cameras and a federal title and a building full of witnesses. That thought did not feel like comfort. It felt like a problem that was much larger than one deputy. 30 days after the incident, my civil rights attorneys filed the lawsuit. The Sheriff's Department's legal team reviewed the synchronized footage. They reviewed my personnel file, 11 years, spotless record, Attorney General commendation, 87% conviction rate. They reviewed Bright Zachary's complaint history, 10 incidents, everyone marked unfounded, a paper trail that read like a liability waiting to be triggered. They reviewed the national coverage. They looked at the crowd of federal agents and defense attorneys who had stood on that sidewalk and watched, and then they made the calculation that departments make when they know they will lose. 10 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, Dallas County offered a settlement of $13 million, the largest and fastest civil rights payout in Dallas County history. They did not want a trial. They did not want me in front of a jury with synchronized dash cam and body cam footage and a building full of corroborating witnesses. The settlement came with a formal letter of apology, which I read once and set aside. Deputy Bright Zachary was terminated 19 days after the footage became public. His name was entered into the National Decertification Index, the registry that ensures an officer who has been removed for misconduct cannot simply cross a state line and pin on a badge somewhere else. He will not wear a badge again. Not in Texas, not anywhere in the United States. I signed the final settlement papers in my office on a quiet afternoon, the city moving below my window the way it always does. Indifferent to the paperwork that marks the end of someone's career and the validation of something I already knew to be true. And then I told my team it was time to unseal the file. This is the part of the story that no one outside my DOJ team knew. For the past 14 months, I had been the lead federal prosecutor on a pattern or practice investigation into the Dallas County Sheriff's Office, a comprehensive federal review of systemic racial profiling within the department. built from complaint records, traffic stop data, use of force logs, and witness testimony gathered quietly over more than a year. The kind of investigation that requires patience and precision and the willingness to build something airtight before you move. Deputy Bright Zachary was one of the named subjects in my sealed investigative file. The grand jury I had been walking into that Thursday morning, the one I rode the elevator to 30 minutes after he grabbed my arm, had been scheduled to hear the first batch of indictments on those exact misconduct patterns. The wire fraud case was real and took precedence that morning, but the pattern or practice work was moving on the same timeline, in the same building, in the same sealed file I was carrying in the briefcase. He nearly knocked to the ground. He had tried to arrest the one person holding the evidence that could dismantle the culture that had protected him for 9 years. I have sat with that fact many times since. The particular weight of it being profiled and physically assaulted by an officer whose conduct I had been meticulously documenting in secret for over a year. There is something almost architectural about it, the way the irony holds. He could not have known. He was operating on the assumption that black women in parking lots have no power, no record, no evidence. He was operating on 9 years of being right about that. He was wrong about me in more ways than he will ever fully understand. 6 weeks after the settlement, the Sheriff's Department announced sweeping internal reforms. Mandatory bias training would now be triggered after the second complaint instead of waiting for an officer to accumulate 10. Any stop involving allegations of racial language would require real-time supervisory review. Use of language like "you people" in an official capacity would result in immediate suspension pending investigation. An independent civil rights oversight unit, something advocates had been requesting for years, would be created and staffed with civilian reviewers who reported outside the department's chain of command. I testified before the Dallas County Commissioner's Court 6 weeks after that. I wore the same gray suit I had worn the morning of the incident. I carried the same briefcase. I stood at that podium and I spoke directly, not to the commissioners, not to the cameras, not to the reporters filling the gallery, but to every black woman and every black man who does not have a federal badge, a dashboard camera, or the Department of Justice standing behind them when someone decides they do not belong where they are parked. The $13 million settlement is accountability. The termination and decertification are accountability. The reforms are a beginning, imperfect, negotiated, and in need of monitoring, but a beginning. I believe in the power of those things. I have spent my career building cases that end in exactly this kind of accounting. But here is the truth I carry out of this. The system moved in 10 weeks because the victim was a credentialed black woman with irrefutable dual camera evidence in a federal building full of witnesses. It had not moved in 9 years for the 10 people who filed complaints before me. 9 years. 10 complaints. 10 human beings whose word was not enough. The evidence is the great equalizer, yes. But the evidence should not have to be perfect, and the victim should not have to be a federal prosecutor for the system to function the way it is supposed to function for everyone. Real change does not begin at the 13th complaint. It begins at the second. Weeks later, I drove past the Earl Cabell Federal Building on a Tuesday morning, parked in the same marked space on Commerce Street, and sat for a moment before going inside. The city was doing what cities do, moving, indifferent, full of people who did not know what had happened on that sidewalk or what it had quietly set in motion. I was not $13 million richer in any way that mattered to me. I was something else. The hidden file I had carried into that building on a Thursday morning was now public record, part of a federal proceeding that would outlast the news cycle and the settlement check and the talking heads who had moved on to the next story. The next Deputy Bright Zachary is out there. He is 9 years into a career protected by filed and forgotten complaints, certain that the woman in the parking lot has no power he cannot override with a uniform and a raised voice. I want him to think twice. I want him to wonder what is in her briefcase.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.
Equity is an ongoing path, and information is your greatest armor. We appreciate your viewership and dedication to undeniable truth.